The moment Maren Vale leaned close enough for me to feel the warmth of her breath against my ear and whispered, "Save the last dance for me," I forgot that 200 people were standing beneath white roses and summer sunlight just 20 feet away. I forgot the champagne glass in my hand. I forgot the string quartet playing near the garden fountain. For one stunned second, I even forgot that Maren was my best friend's younger sister, the one person I had spent nearly 15 years convincing myself I was never supposed to want. Then she stepped away, looked directly into my eyes with a nervous smile that disappeared almost as quickly as it came, and walked back toward the wedding party as though she hadn't just reopened a door I had spent half my life trying to keep closed. What made it worse was that 3 hours earlier, I had arrived at that wedding alone, carrying a gift for my best friend and the quiet certainty that some people were simply meant to watch everyone else find happiness. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the possibility that one unexpected moment can change an entire life, please like, comment, share this video, and subscribe to Lifeline Vibes. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the thing we think we missed forever is only waiting for us to become brave enough to recognize it. My name is Adrian Mercer, and at 36 years old, I had become very good at attending other people's celebrations without letting anyone notice how empty they made me feel. Engagement dinners, housewarmings, baby showers, anniversary parties, I had mastered the smile, the handshake, the joke delivered at exactly the right moment. I knew how to stand at the edge of photographs and make it look intentional. I knew how to answer the inevitable question about whether I was seeing anyone with a laugh and some vague comment about work being busy. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. I had once believed deeply in building a life with someone, and when that relationship ended 4 years earlier, I had quietly stopped believing that kind of life was still waiting for me. There had been no dramatic betrayal, no screaming match, no shattered dishes. My fiancée, Sienna, had simply sat across from me one rainy evening and admitted that she loved me but no longer wanted the future we had planned. Somehow, that almost hurt more. There was nobody to hate, which meant I spent years wondering whether I had simply not been enough. The only person who never allowed me to disappear completely into that version of myself was my best friend, Callum Rhodes. Callum and I had been friends since university, the kind of friendship built through cheap apartments, terrible first jobs, road trips with broken air conditioning, family funerals, promotions, heartbreaks, and enough embarrassing memories to destroy each other socially if either of us ever became famous. When Callum called to tell me he was marrying a woman named Serena Ashford, I had never heard him sound so certain about anything. He asked me to stand beside him as best man before he had even finished telling me how he proposed. I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was held at an old estate outside the city, a place with stone terraces, long lawns, flowering trees, and a glass pavilion facing a quiet lake. Callum and Serena wanted everything in daylight because Serena loved the way afternoon sun came through the trees. By 11 that morning, the property looked like something from a movie. White chairs lined the lawn beneath an arch of pale roses and eucalyptus. Guests wandered between tables dressed in cream linen. Staff carried trays of sparkling drinks through the garden. Somewhere behind the pavilion, musicians tuned violins while sunlight shimmered on the water. It should have felt joyful. Instead, as I stepped out of my car alone and straightened my tie, I felt the familiar ache of being the person arriving without anyone beside him. Then I saw Maren. She was standing near the terrace steps holding a small bouquet and trying to fix the ribbon around one of the flower girl's wrists. Her dress was deep blue, simple and elegant, and her dark hair was pinned loosely enough that a few strands moved in the warm breeze. I had seen Maren dozens of times over the years, but not like this. The last time we had spoken properly had been nearly 3 years earlier at Callum's birthday dinner. Before that, our relationship had existed in fragments scattered across time. She had been 17 when I first met her, sarcastic and fearless, always stealing food from Callum's plate and telling us both we dressed badly. By her 20s, she had become someone completely different and somehow exactly the same: smart, observant, quietly funny, the kind of person who noticed when someone at a party felt left out and found a reason to stand beside them. What nobody knew, especially Callum, was that there had been one summer when Maren and I had almost crossed a line. She had been 25. I had been 30. Callum had gone away for work, and Maren had needed help moving into a new apartment. I spent an entire Saturday carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs while she complained about the landlord, ordered too much Thai food, and played old music through a speaker balanced on the kitchen counter. At sunset, when the apartment was finally quiet, we sat on the floor beside unopened boxes and talked for hours. Not small talk. Real talk. The kind that makes you realize someone has been hiding entire rooms inside themselves. She told me she worried people only saw her as Callum's little sister. I admitted I was terrified of becoming the kind of man who built his identity entirely around work. At some point, our shoulders touched. Neither of us moved away. Then she looked at me for a little too long, and I knew. I also knew Callum trusted me. So I stood up, made some joke about needing to leave, and spent the drive home telling myself I had done the right thing. 2 months later, I started dating Sienna. Maren never mentioned that evening again. At Callum's wedding, when she looked up from the flower girl and saw me on the terrace, something passed across her face. Surprise first. Then warmth. Then a brief hesitation I might have imagined. She walked over and hugged me, and for a second I caught the faint scent of jasmine in her hair. She told me I cleaned up well. I told her she looked beautiful. There was nothing inappropriate in the words, yet both of us suddenly became aware of them. Then Callum shouted my name from across the lawn and ruined the moment in the way only a best friend could. The ceremony began shortly after noon. Callum cried before Serena even reached the aisle, which meant I spent most of the ceremony trying not to laugh while pretending I wasn't emotional myself. Maren stood on Serena's side. Twice, maybe 3 times, I caught her looking at me instead of the couple. Each time our eyes met, she looked away first. I told myself not to create meaning where there wasn't any. After the ceremony, the reception moved into the gardens. The afternoon remained bright and warm. Lunch was served beneath a stretched canopy overlooking the lake. Speeches followed. I gave mine, telling stories about Callum's terrible cooking, his loyalty, and the fact that Serena was the first person I had ever met who could win an argument with him without raising her voice. People laughed. Callum wiped his eyes. Serena hugged me afterward. It was during the photographs that I overheard 2 women asking Maren whether she had brought anyone. She smiled and said no. One of them teased her about always coming to weddings alone. For reasons I didn't want to examine, the comment stayed with me. The music began in the early afternoon. The dance floor had been built under the open side of the pavilion, where sunlight passed through sheer curtains and moved across the floor like water. Callum and Serena danced first. Then parents joined them. Then friends. I stayed near the bar, talking to an old university acquaintance and doing my best impression of a man perfectly comfortable watching romance from a safe distance. That was when Maren appeared beside me. She asked why I wasn't dancing. I told her I was protecting everyone from my lack of rhythm. She laughed, but instead of leaving, she stayed. We stood shoulder to shoulder watching Callum spin Serena beneath the lights. For a while neither of us said anything. Then Maren asked whether I was happy. It was such a simple question that I almost answered automatically. Instead, I asked what she meant. She looked toward the lake and said she meant exactly what she had asked. I could have lied. I told her I was trying to be. Something changed in her expression then. The teasing disappeared. She said trying wasn't the same thing. Before I could answer, someone called her over for another photograph. She took 2 steps away, stopped, then turned back. She came close enough that nobody else could hear her, and whispered, "Save the last dance for me." Then she walked away. For the next 2 hours, I could barely think about anything else. Part of me assumed it was harmless. A nostalgic gesture between people who had known each other for years. Another part of me remembered an apartment floor, cardboard boxes, sunset through dusty windows, and the way she had once looked at me before I chose distance. As the afternoon moved forward, clouds gathered softly above the lake, turning the bright summer light silver without darkening the day. Guests drifted between the terrace and the gardens. Children ran barefoot across the grass. Callum moved from table to table with the stunned grin of a man still surprised that the happiest day of his life was actually happening. Eventually, he found me alone near the water. He asked why I looked like somebody had handed me a tax audit during a wedding. I laughed. Then he glanced toward the pavilion, where Maren was talking to Serena, and his expression changed. He asked one question. "Is this about my sister?" For a second I genuinely considered diving into the lake. I asked him what he was talking about. Callum said he had known for years. That stopped me. He told me he had noticed the way Maren talked about me after the summer I helped her move. He had noticed how quiet she became when I started dating Sienna. He even admitted that years ago he had been angry about the possibility of something happening between us, not because he thought I would hurt her intentionally, but because I was his friend and she was his sister and he didn't know how to separate those parts of his life. Then he said something I never expected. He told me he had grown up since then. I looked at him. Callum said Maren had spent years choosing people who never really saw her because the one person she trusted enough to see her had walked away before anything could begin. The words hit me harder than I wanted them to. I said I had been trying to respect him. Callum shook his head and said I had used respect as an excuse because I was afraid. I wanted to argue. I couldn't. Because he was right. Even with Sienna, even after our engagement ended, fear had been the hidden engine behind so many decisions. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of risking friendships. Fear of being rejected. Fear of admitting what I wanted if wanting it meant I could lose something. Callum placed a hand on my shoulder and told me he wasn't giving me permission. Maren didn't need anyone's permission. He was simply asking me not to waste her time if I intended to keep running. Then he walked back toward his wife. The last dance came sooner than I expected. It was still daylight, though the sun had lowered enough to cast gold across the lawn. The band announced the final song before Callum and Serena left for their send-off. Couples moved onto the floor. Older relatives leaned against each other. Children danced badly between tables. The whole pavilion glowed with that strange, temporary beauty weddings have near the end, when everyone knows the day is slipping away. Maren stood across the room. She wasn't looking at me. For one terrible moment, I almost stayed where I was. Then I understood that this was how a person could lose 10 more years without realizing it, one hesitation at a time. I crossed the floor. When I reached her, she looked up, and the surprise on her face told me some part of her had expected me not to come. I held out my hand. She took it. We moved onto the dance floor. Neither of us was particularly good at dancing, which somehow made it easier. I rested one hand carefully against her back. Her hand settled on my shoulder. Around us, people turned slowly beneath the afternoon light. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I apologized. Not for loving her. Not for almost kissing her years ago. I apologized for pretending nothing had happened. Maren's eyes filled instantly, though she smiled as though she had been waiting a very long time to hear those words. She admitted she had spent years wondering whether she imagined that night in her apartment. I told her she hadn't. She asked why I left. I told her the truth. Because I was scared that if I chose her, I could lose Callum. And because somewhere deep down, I had never believed I was allowed to want something that complicated. She looked over my shoulder toward her brother, who was dancing with Serena. Then Maren said the thing that finally broke through every defense I had left. She said love was always complicated when it mattered. I laughed softly, mostly because if I didn't, I might cry in front of half the wedding guests. I told her Callum knew. She froze. Then she slowly looked toward him. Callum raised his glass from across the floor with the most irritating smile I had ever seen. Maren started laughing. It was the sound that changed everything for me. Not fireworks. Not some grand cinematic kiss while the crowd cheered. Just Maren laughing in my arms while sunlight poured through the pavilion and my best friend pretended not to watch. When the song ended, neither of us moved away. I asked whether she would have coffee with me the following Saturday. She asked why Saturday. I told her because asking for forever at my best friend's wedding seemed dramatic, but Saturday felt like something two people could actually keep. She smiled and said yes. We didn't kiss that day. That mattered to me. For once, I didn't want to rush a meaningful moment simply because I had finally become brave enough to enter it. We started with coffee. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became long walks, phone calls after midnight, arguments about movies, Sunday mornings in crowded cafes, and eventually the realization that the person I had spent years avoiding because she could complicate my life was the person who made life feel simpler than it had in years. There were difficult moments too. Maren had her own scars. She had spent years wondering whether she was someone people chose only temporarily. I had developed the habit of withdrawing whenever I feared disappointment. We had to learn how to disagree without disappearing. We had to learn that second chances don't erase old wounds, they simply give you a reason to heal them honestly. A year after Callum's wedding, Maren and I returned to the same estate for their anniversary picnic. The pavilion was closed for another event, but we walked down toward the lake. It was another bright afternoon. Callum and Serena were ahead of us arguing playfully about where to put the picnic basket. Maren slipped her hand into mine. I looked at her and thought about how close I had come to missing this life. Not because destiny had failed me. Because fear almost had. Sometimes we imagine the biggest losses happen suddenly. A breakup. A death. A door slamming shut. But some losses happen quietly. They happen every time we refuse to speak. Every time we convince ourselves we are protecting others when we are actually protecting ourselves from vulnerability. Every time we choose certainty over possibility. That wedding taught me something I wish I had understood when I was younger. Courage isn't always running into danger. Sometimes courage is crossing a dance floor. Sometimes it is holding out your hand. Sometimes it is finally admitting that the person you have been trying not to love has been waiting for you to stop pretending. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, leave a comment, and subscribe to Lifeline Vibes. Your support helps stories about hope, kindness, love, and second chances reach people who may be standing at their own crossroads right now. And before this story ends, I have one special request. Comment choose courage if there is something in your life you know you've been postponing because fear keeps telling you there will always be more time. Years later, whenever someone asks how Maren and I finally found each other, she tells them I asked her for coffee at her brother's wedding. I always correct her. She found me first. She found me standing alone at the edge of a crowded room, convinced the best parts of my life had already happened. Then she leaned close and asked me to save one dance. And somehow, that last dance became the first moment of everything that came after. If you want, I can also turn this story into a higher retention YouTube version with stronger suspense beats every 30-45 seconds while keeping the same plot.